All right, so today we're going to be talking about setting boundaries, which is everybody's favorite topic. Setting boundaries. And we're going to start with why there's a need for setting boundaries. When you work with a population of students that have high need, right? Students with disabilities, students with learning differences, students with mental, emotional, cognitive needs. We want to do our best as tutors to accommodate them, but we also as tutors want to take care of ourselves because these students can sometimes take a big toll on our own emotional and mental health. And so setting boundaries is kind of a necessary thing that we need to do in order to make sure that we can both serve the student and take care of ourselves. So we're going to start this presentation with a TED Talk by Sari Gilman, and unfortunately when I click this it pulls up a YouTube ad, so we're going to have to deal with the YouTube ad because TEDx doesn't necessarily load everything like it's supposed to onto TED.
Once in a while, something comes along.
Well, that's fun.
So masterful.
We're going to skip it though.
Everyone is in the middle of a life story, and your story is being shaped by what you are saying yes to and what you are saying no to. Your yeses and nos are what boundaries are made of. So what are boundaries? How do we build them? How do we heal when our boundaries are violated? And how do we push through boundaries? These questions have been the center of my life and my work. When I was a little kid and my world was just my family, I was pretty sure we were the only ones struggling with those questions. And then I grew up and I became a family therapist. And I saw lots of people struggling with these questions. And when I took a detour and ran nonprofits, I saw communities and leaders struggling with these questions. So now I teach workshops and wrote a book to help people answer these questions. And as people answer these questions and learn more about their boundaries, I've watched hundreds of people make the journey from being overwhelmed and exhausted and stressed out to people who trust themselves and are decisive and are committed to healthy relationships. I'm going to share some stories and some tools that you can use to strengthen your boundaries. Let's begin with the most essential boundary tool that everyone has. Take a moment and visualize the compass in your hand. It looks just like this. It has two words on it, yes and no, and only those two words. You use this compass to make your decisions, figure out your relationships, and set your boundaries for your whole life. Today I'm going to talk about how you can use this compass to place boundaries where you need them the most, lower your stress, and figure out your life's purpose. Now, the key to placing boundaries where you need them the most is tolerating stormy emotions. I was raised by my grandparents, and my grandfather had one way of doing things, his way. And when I was 24, he came to me and he asked me to be the executor of his will. And I asked him, what was it he wanted me to do after he died? And when he told me, I got all this stress inside because there were things I didn't want to do to other family members on his behalf. And I really wanted to please him, but I couldn't say yes to all this stuff. So I told him, no, I couldn't be his executor. And he did what most people do when you tell them no. He got angry. You know, when you listen to your own yes and no, other people are going to get angry or they may get disappointed. Boundary setting will unleash emotions. And yes and no are not feelings. So I couldn't let my fear of my grandfather's anger, nor my desire to please him, determine my boundaries. Now, sometimes your compass is clouded over, and you can't see if something is a yes or a no for you. And this happens if you've been ignoring your compass or arguing with it because you don't like what it's saying. Years ago, I wanted to be a writer. And I was very busy working, and I couldn't figure out how writers made time to write and earn a living. So I took this yes and I shoved it to the side. Those are the writers that are here. and my daughters and I were attending this writing camp, week-long thing for middle schoolers, and I got to go as a chaperone. And one night, this real writer got on the stage, and he told us how he made time to write, what he said yes to with his time, and what he said no to in order to complete his books. He lived very cheaply, and his sole job was writing. There was my answer. So for 2 years, I saved my money, I lowered my expenses, and then when the time came when I had my money saved up, I devoted myself to writing. How's that work? And in like just a few short months, my yes became a no. Writing is a solo sport. You sit alone all day. There I was talking to my dog. Oh, this is not the move for me. I'm a people person. So I listened to my no. I went back to working with people, and I saved some of my time for writing. That was a much better fit. Now, if you pay attention to this compass, it just gives you the basic guidance, the yes and the no. It doesn't give you any details. You have to figure out the details. But the thing is, you can trust this compass because it's only trying to do one thing, and that's take care of you. And if you allow your compass and your boundaries to take care of you, it'll mitigate stress. And stress is a very serious issue. According to the American Psychological Association, 50 to 58% of us, I'm not going to say who, are suffering from high stress. That's kind of a shocking number. And employers who are listening may want to pay attention to this and think about how important is decision-making on the job? Because this compass is highly sensitive to stress, and stress clouds over your compass. I teach people boundary skills so that they can reduce and prevent their stress from accumulating. The challenging thing, though, is that setting boundaries is just a little stressful, right? It's brief stress, though. Like once you get over that brief stress of actually doing it, you feel all this relief. And I call that brief stress sweating. You're going to do a little sweating when you set your boundaries. I sweat and I teach this stuff. So let's go back to this compass in your hand that is only trying to take care of you. And ask yourself this question. Are there ways that you could improve your self-care? And when I say self-care, many of you may think first about what you eat and how much you exercise. And those are really important, but even people who do those really well are going to have high stress if they aren't managing their boundaries. Self-care is a much bigger landscape than eating and exercise. Self-care is how you treat yourself. It's how you find enjoyment, play, happiness, balance, rest, and companionship. I'm the first to admit, though, that self-care can be really hard, and it took me a long time to learn how to do it. In the past, and I like saying past, I was a workaholic caretaker. And back then, I was running an agency that was serving teens who were homeless. It was an agency that I started and I was deeply committed to. And over the years, as the organization grew, it needed more and more from me. So what if I was up night after night trying to make that budget work, and I couldn't a lot of the time? So what if I was on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, year after year after year? So what if I was getting sick from watching so much child abuse. So what if I actually had post-traumatic stress from it? I ignored my own care until one day I was sitting in this dark movie theater and I was crying and crying. I broke. I couldn't stop crying. And I realized something inside was trying to reach me. And as I listened to my tears, I understood that I couldn't keep running this organization that I started and that I loved. My compass was saying no for my well-being. That was really hard to take, my well-being up against all these kids who needed help. So I dug deep with my compass about my purpose. And I understood that maybe it had been my purpose to start the organization, but 10 years later, the community loved and could care for this organization. And so I spent a year with my board of directors and we transitioned leadership to new leaders for the organization. And I want to tell you, it's still standing 24 years now, taking care of kids every day. Oh, that's to you guys. Every day and every night, doing exactly what it was designed to do, the way it was designed to do it. And I learned from my compass that other people could take care of the kids and the staff and the organization, but only I could take care of me. And then I had to face my workaholic. Oh my. My workaholic, she's terrifying. She's worse than my grandfather. My workaholic never says, oh, take a break. You've done enough. My workaholic is crazy. And she just keeps going and going and going. And I had to intervene with some care for me. And my care for me got better and better, year after year, step by step. Now I challenge myself every day to do some of my work and then do something that I love, that I can fit into each day. So I knit more, I hang out with my friends. My friends are kind of shocked that I have time for them. My husband and I, we do less chores and we just have more fun. And my daughters and I are in this ongoing conversation about healthy living as they both grew up and went into healthcare, go figure. And this summer, on a hot sunny day, I was watching this eagle soaring overhead at the beach. I remember everything about this day. It was a Tuesday, a work day. I had taken my lunch. I drove 4 minutes from my office to the beach, and there I was, taking a 45-minute lunch break, watching this eagle and listening to the waves. Now that's recovery. Now I need to warn you, even if you're doing all the boundary pieces, like you've separated your feelings from your boundaries, and you're doing some good self-care, and you're really listening to your yes and no, and maybe you've recovered from workaholism or numbing out. Even when you do all these pieces really, really well, there are going to be some things that are going to challenge your boundaries, and they're going to make things extra hard. None of us are immune to health issues, to a financial crisis, or to a family member who has an addiction problem. And some of you are dealing with those struggles every day. Some of you are dealing with really tough challenges at your job every day. There are 3 things that you can do to support your compass. First, increase your self-care. You may already be doing some self-care, but you need to step it up. When your loved one has breast cancer, what I always see is your care for you goes down while you care for someone else. And taking that time to care for yourself may seem completely ridiculous in the face of such a big challenge. but I want to see the care for you go up while you care for someone else, so that you're a stronger support in the long run for you and for them. The second thing to do is to reach out and build a web of resources. Your compass may not have enough information to guide you through the challenge that you're dealing with. We're not all experts in everything. Find people who have this expertise, join a support group, see a therapist, take a class, reach out. The third thing to do is to really focus on choosing your responsibilities and limiting your time during a challenge. During a challenge, we have like tons of extra responsibilities just coming down the hill at us, and you can't do it all. You have to decide what you will and won't be responsible for, and you have to let go of some of the rest. And nowadays, our technology has created this illusion that you are all a device that is always on. And now more than ever, you need to be careful and be protective so that you have some time to recover during a big challenge and times when you're not doing ongoing problem solving. All of you are in the middle of a life story, and your story is being shaped by what you are saying yes to and what you are saying. If you shut out the noise and listen, you're going to find yourself going through life with less stress and profoundly in tune with your purpose. Thank you.
Okay. So I like using TED Talks as kind of a supplement to CRLA and teaching, simply because I think other people say it better than me. For the most part. So
Kim, can you send us the link for that?
yes,
Yay.
it will be in the training. So when we talk about the LEP and setting boundaries for our students, right? And just keep in mind that wasn't necessarily tailored for the LEP, but I think it's a good talk to think about, because as tutors, right, you have to be okay in yourself to be able to work with some of these students and some of the issues that these students have. And so why boundaries? Why do we need boundaries for the LEP? And there are many valid reasons to set boundaries between yourself and the students you tutor. These can range from setting behavioral and communication expectations to dealing with conflict in a tutoring session. I mean, it's a big range, right? It can be from a body odor problem to a student who is having a complete, what we call, meltdown. According to Stork and Walker, on the learner side, recognizing boundaries can avoid overdependency when the aim is to provide comprehensive support, but at the same time, get the learner to take responsibility and to be independent. On the tutor side, boundaries can help in looking after yourself and being able to compartmentalize the personal and professional, which can be crucial when faced with learners with varied, complex, and challenging issues. Our students certainly have very complex and challenging issues, right? We have students who have disabilities that might stem from brain injury. They might be on the autism spectrum. They might have ADHD. They might have learning disabilities, or they have non-documented learning differences. And on top of that, right, our students face substance abuse issues. They face poor decision-making. They have issues with family, just like everybody else. They have issues with significant others. They might have high anxiety. They might suffer from depression. So there's a lot of things going on with our students. And keep in mind, the tutors, you guys, have a lot of this going on, right? You might have learning differences. You might be dealing with anxiety. You might be dealing with depression. And so we have to keep these things in mind as tutors, because our students will lump anything and everything onto our shoulders because they see you and they trust you. And so sometimes they bring that stuff to you, particularly if you're a writing tutor. You really get into a student's headspace when you're a writing tutor, because you are seeing their thoughts written out on paper. And that can be kind of hard to take. So some reasons why setting boundaries can be difficult for us in the LEP. Number one is we care about our students' academic success. We want our students to be successful, right? We care. That's why we do this. We want to help students do well in their classes, We want to make sure that they pass, we want to make sure that they get good grades, and we want to make sure that they retain the information that we present. That's not always the case. Unfortunately, sometimes our students don't pass. Is that necessarily your fault as a tutor? No, not necessarily, right? And realistically, if a student doesn't pass a class, it's probably got nothing to do with you. There are probably other things going on. So we sometimes will allow students extra leeway because we really want them to pass that class, but instead we might need to work with them on time management, on procrastination, right? Oh my God, I'm 10 minutes late. I'm so sorry. And it's a 30-minute session, right? What are you going to get out of a 20-minute tutoring session? Is it better to have a conversation with the student at that point about setting boundaries and talking about procrastination? Would that be better for the student? Or would it be better to try to cram information into a 20-minute session? You have to make those decisions. We also have a hard time when it comes to students' mental and emotional health. When a student shows up and they're not okay, right? They're in crisis, they may be having a freak out moment, they just failed their midterm. We want to do anything and everything to help that student out. And realistically, unless you guys are social workers and certified to be social workers or counselors or psychologists or psychiatrists, you're not qualified to assist that student. And in fact, we have counselors in the program who do those things that the students are paying for as part of their service here. So at that point, when a student's coming in and they're in mental or emotional crisis, we should refer them. And that's setting a boundary, right? I am not your counselor, and I cannot help you with this. So I'm going to get you to the person who can. Take them to HCC, bring them up here so we can find their counselor. Let the student know that when they're in that particular state, that doesn't go to you. Even if they trust you, that should not be placed on your shoulders. That's not your burden to bear. And then the last one, which is why I like this TED Talk so much, is the difficulty of saying no. Is there anybody who has a hard time saying no? Not me.
Yes, and I had to do it today like twice.
Yeah, I do not have this problem. My no filter, no was I think one of the first words I ever said, quite honestly. So I'm I've got a very good, strong no boundary. But I recognize that not everybody does, right? So it's very hard to say no to students for a lot of reasons. Why might it be hard to say no? And Zoomies, feel free to interject.
You don't want to let somebody down.
Don't want to let them down?
You like want to help them out.
Yeah, you want to help them out. I want to make sure that you get what you need. Why else might it be hard to say no? There's like one big, glaring, obvious one that nobody's wanting to mention.
It's
Feeling guilty? Yeah, Ben? What? Ben?
You don't want to deal with having to explain yourself for why, if they push back for why you say no?
Push back, right? So conflict. They might, right? The students might be mad. I'm mad at you because you told me no, and no one's ever done that before. Some of these students have not heard no enough, quite honestly. And so it's good for them to learn how to deal with that emotional carnage that comes from being disappointed because they couldn't have a thing that they wanted right then and there. Right? So for instance, if a student is running 20 minutes late to a tutoring session and you've already packed up your stuff and are out the door and they're calling you and begging you to please come back, that's a good opportunity to practice no and insert some of those lessons that we learned in the last training regarding the 4 cornerstones, right? Accountability being the first one. You were late. It was 20 minutes into our session. We now only have 40 minutes and I've already left. We can reschedule, but in the future, you need to be on time. Because now they've learned a consequence and you've set a boundary. The student knows, oh crap, if I'm not on time, the tutor leaves. And that protects you and your time, but it also teaches the student that they need to be a little bit more on top of their time management, right? We're teaching a lesson at the same time we're setting a boundary. And that's important for a lot of our students to understand. And it's a safe environment, right? There's less risk to them in having a boundary set in the LEP than there is if they cross a boundary they didn't know in a work situation and get reprimanded, right? There's a lot higher risk there. So ways to set boundaries with LEP students. Know when and how to refer students to other campus resources. Know when it's not part of your job to fix the problem, right? If it's a mental health problem, if it's an emotional crisis, if the student is talking about self-harm, you need to know who to refer to. There's a training on the LEP resource page called Mental Health First Aid. I highly recommend you review that because it goes through these processes and tells you who you can refer students to depending on what their need is. Establish clear policies about communication expectations. 9 times out of 10, if you are clearly communicating with your students, you won't have to set boundaries because you've communicated your boundaries. Communication is a big, big deal with our students, right? Because not only are we role modeling what good communication looks like, we're also setting expectations and boundaries regarding what kinds of communication we allow and when we allow it. No 3 a.m. text messages, I don't do that. Okay. Set limits on how much of your time to devote to specific students. Sometimes we have the students that we absolutely adore because they're fantastic and we love their personalities and we jive with them. And sometimes that makes us spend a little more time on them than we should, right? So we're giving the student the impression that we would go above and beyond for them at any cost. And that's not necessarily okay because what if you have a big appointment you have to be at, but you have consistently stayed late with the student because you enjoy working with them. The student's expectation is now that we will stay late and then you get up and leave and they're disappointed, right? And then we have conflict and we don't like that. Reiterate LEP tutoring program policies regarding take-home tests and quizzes. This is a big one. I put this one down specifically because it's becoming an issue. Students are bringing their quizzes and their tests to you, even if they're take-home, right? And here's the problem. Only LEP students can use LEP tutors. How many students in their class do you think are in the LEP? Right? So for academic integrity's sake, do not work, this is a hard one, this is actually written in the policies and procedures manual. Do not work on their quizzes or take-home tests with them. Don't even read them to them because the other students in the class don't have that. The only way we get around that one is if we have a letter from the instructor or DSP stating they received that accommodation. Okay? But that's one that students are getting kind of sneaky about. They're like, sneaking their test, yeah, you're not agree. Yes, they do that.
Because last year I had people try to do that, and I had to actually like outright ask, be like, is this a test?
Yes. Yes. Please be aware that they are sneaky like that, and it's because they want help so much. They don't do it to be malicious, right? But they are taking advantage, and that's not a good way to take advantage of something. Learn respectful, professional ways of managing student incivilities. This is a big one. A lot of our students can be crass, they can be blunt, they can be having meltdowns. We may or may not have students with Tourette's, right? And one of the things about Tourette's is you can sometimes have verbal tics, and those often manifest as vulgarity. Students on the autism spectrum often prefer very direct communication and will give you very direct communication. So kind of read the situation with that, but set your boundaries for what you do and don't allow in terms of verbal communication, in terms of bluntness, in terms of all that stuff, because even if that's how the student communicates, if it makes you uncomfortable, there needs to be a conversation about it. Don't over-prepare. We do have issues with students, with tutors, putting in prep time and doing extra work for students during prep time that they shouldn't be doing, right? If it's work that you should be doing with a student, you should be doing it with the student and not during prep time. That's a hard boundary again. So if I see your reasonings for prep time and it was like, oh, I helped a student debug an assignment and during my prep time so that we can focus on the assignment during the session. The student needs to learn to do that, right? It's a programming class. Bill, you know this. Debugging is 90% of what you do.
Yep.
You have to learn that process. If the student doesn't see you work on that process with them, they're not learning anything. So don't use your prep time to over-prepare for your tutoring sessions. Use it to prepare just enough. Read the syllabus, read the assignment, go through the textbook, but don't do the student's work. Avoid trying to cover too much. Sometimes students will show up and in their little assignment requests, their tutor requests, they'll say, I want to work on 5 different things, none of them are related. I've noticed this. I have seen students put in multiple classes for a single tutoring session. So as tutors, we have to clarify which one do you want to work on, because I can't give you quality if I'm doing too much, right? Quality over quantity. Request student feedback on a regular basis. This is something I am trying to work on. Currently, our technology does not allow me to send out live surveys right at the end of a tutoring session for students to give you direct feedback. We are working towards that, so hopefully we'll have something maybe by next year. But you can always ask the student, how do you think I did? Sometimes they'll be really honest and sometimes they won't. But that's always very helpful. So we're going to go through some scenarios, and Zoom people, you are not to type in the chat because as you can see, I am not looking at it right now. So do me a favor and unmute your mic to add to the conversation and actually talk to us. So we're going to go through some tutoring scenarios, and I want you guys to discuss these as a group and share ideas. I will try to clarify what's being said in the room to the people on Zoom. But the
Kim,
first,
this is actually good because half the time when people write in the chat, VoiceOver reads it unless I have it muted, which is good, but then I can't hear you as well.
okay, so please verbally respond. Tutoring scenario number 1, a tutee comes to you and asks you to go over course material that they missed yesterday and says they understand things so much better from you than from the professor. They want to continue meeting with you on a recurring basis. The tutee starts asking you to prepare problems and correct assignments outside of tutoring sessions. You start to suspect the student might not be going to class and is working with you rather than their professor as the primary source for the class. What boundaries and or discussions should you consider having with the tutee?
I mean, well, the first one is what you were saying a minute ago, is doing too much work during prep time rather than doing your own, like just reviewing things that you might be not be fully confident on.
Yeah, so don't over prepare, yeah. There's a big glaring question here that you should be asking.
Why aren't you going to class?
Well, how do you know? You suspect, but you don't know.
Are you going to class?
Are you going to class? And I put this one in here because this has actually happened. We had a tutor a couple years ago who told me this story and said that they discovered halfway through the class the student hadn't been since week 2 and had only been coming to tutoring. Right? The tutor is not the instructor. What other conversations or boundaries might we set with the student?
Yeah, I think myself, I would say, I'm not the professor, I'm not the driving force here, I'm here to assist in any way, clarify anything, but I'm not going to correct assignments.
Right.
I'm not going to prepare additional problems outside of what the class is providing, or whatever the professor is providing for practice. I'll gladly work through some of those, but I'm not the professor.
Yeah, you're not the instructor, you're a supplement. You're a vitamin, not the meal.
Also kind of what you mentioned earlier with the take-home exams and how not everyone has the LEP resources that they might have, maybe encouraging your student to put themselves in other students' perspectives and ask, do they have this individualized attention? And they don't, and that empathy might encourage them to step back a little bit and go to class.
Yeah, and that's a 4 cornerstone conversation, right? Because we're asking them to kind of review themselves and put themselves in someone else's shoes. And is this a fair thing for you to be doing? Our students are sometimes muddy on ethics and morals.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, we can be.
A basic logistics question for me is, I ask when is the class, so I usually know classes are Wednesdays and Tuesdays, so I ask for this, that's a conversational piece.
Yeah, asking when the class is so you have an idea. And if they're doing tutoring at the same time their class is going on, that's a pretty good indication they're not going. That was how we figured it out with this last tutor. Anything else, or are we moving on to number 2? Okay. Scenario number 2. A student makes an appointment for a tutoring session but brings one or more friends or classmates with them. After some discussion, you discover that these classmates are not LEP students and are not paying for LEP services. What might setting boundaries with this student look like? What problems can you see arising, and how would you handle them?
Probably the student getting really mad at you when you say, look, I can only tutor you. I can't tutor, 8 of your friends.
Yes, but how would you approach that conversation?
I mean, I think I would start by saying that last bit kind of directly.
You could take it as a sales point of view, ask the classmates to step away for a minute and say, look, you are not LEP students. If you want to be part of the program, please let me know and we can get you further information. And then hopefully they can come into the program and then use the tutoring services.
That's a better idea.
Ben, I trained you so well. Ben was one of my tutors for many years before. And one of the things we always said in my last program was if a student brought friends to a tutoring session, the likelihood was that those people needed tutoring and probably had like issues along with that student, right? So if we can get more students into the LEP, let's do it. What I usually did in those situations is say, look, I'm going to meet with you this one time, but I'm going to make everyone at the table 100% aware you need to be in the program to receive these services. So it's kind of like giving them a little taste of what they could have, like a little free demo. And then say, okay, now if you want this again, you got to be in the program. And so that helps our program out, but it also makes it very clear to the student that you have to pay for this. And this is not a freebie service for your friends. But you're kind of giving the friends the benefit of the doubt that you'll come back and see us because obviously you need this.
What do you do if they show up again?
If they show up again, then you can do what Chelsea suggested, which is, hey, I said only I could tutor you because we had this conversation. I'm sorry, I can only meet with you. Your friends are going to have to go elsewhere. I'm sorry. And realistically, you probably don't even need to add the I'm sorry part because you covered it once.
I had a student ask to bring friends to a session last year, and it was like a group project or something that they wanted help on. And thankfully, this was prior to the appointment, so I was able to talk to her, and I just kind of had a really kind of real conversation with her, just saying, these are one-on-one tutoring sessions, and that I'm best prepared to work with you individually, and like this isn't for group settings, and also I'm not there to do your group project.
Perfect. I think that's great. All right, number 3. You're in a tutoring session and time has run out, but the tutee has a strong desire to continue discussing more concepts and their test is in an hour. You have a 30-minute window before you need to be somewhere else. Not going to say where, you just have to be somewhere else. What do you do and how might you set boundaries with this student? This is a common one, big time. Right? I see your guys' timesheets on a regular basis, so I know when you've gone over time. Just an FYI.
Well, I was going to say, I think I'd do something similar to the last one, where if this is the first time this is happening, I'll say, like, I could stay a couple extra minutes. But then I would probably try to emphasize the fact that if you needed more time, you need to have another, like, appointment, like, before this one. So
Yeah.
think ahead.
Yeah. So again, having that time management discussion. If you need more time, schedule it, because then I've planned for it. Right? If you tell me 60 minutes, my plan is for 60 minutes. But if you want to stay for an hour and a half, I didn't plan for that extra 30 minutes. Maybe you have somewhere else to be. Maybe you were going to go home and eat dinner. Right? It's that self-care component. When you let them take your time, you start to find you have no time left. I got to a point.
There's also
Go ahead.
sorry, I think I interrupted someone.
Fine.
I was going to say there's also the concern of the fact that we're an hour before the test, and ultimately what we as tutors need to be doing is not only teaching these students how to be good at that specific class, but we also need to be establishing how the student can go on to not need us anymore. They shouldn't need LEP, they shouldn't need tutoring after they get out of their degree. So we're trying to teach them to be self-sufficient. So perhaps a good option here would be to say to the student, look, I think you should take this hour by yourself and go over the concepts that we've already gone over the last hour, go over whatever you feel you need for this test that's coming up, and then you'll be better prepared. Make them more self-sufficient so they don't need to feel like they're having to lean on you as much.
Yeah, and I've always said, you know, our job as a tutor is to put ourselves out of a job, right? By the end of a class, we should have done enough with that student that they are self-sufficient in the class. They don't need us as much. In fact, I had a student the other day, and I don't know that anyone currently on this chat or in the room has worked with him, but he came into my office and was asking for a tutor for one of his advanced classes. He's getting ready to graduate in the spring, right? And he was so cool. He said, you know what? I don't need tutors as much as I used to. When I was a freshman and a sophomore, I used them all the time. This is my first tutoring request of the quarter. And he was so proud because he could do the work on his own. That's our job. That feels good to hear because it gives us hope that when these students leave, they have the self-sufficiency and the self-advocacy and the self-determination to be successful without our help. We're there to give them the skills and guide them. But once they leave us, it's up to them. Right, so that 30-minute window there, teaching students to kind of make use of their time on their own, teaching them how to do that on their own is part of our job. Okay, go to the next one here. The class that comes in at 6:30 is starting to stare at us through the door. We've got 15 minutes. Tutoring scenario number 4. You're in a tutoring session and time has run out. Oh goodness, did I just copy the same one? I did, look at me go. Okay, we're gonna go to number 5. Tutoring scenario number 5. I don't remember what was supposed to be there, but we'll do number 5 now. During and or after a tutoring session, you feel compelled to talk about it to your TT so that other tutors and students and the student's LEP counselor can be aware of the problems that exist. Who do you consult and what are the possible boundaries between gossip and being informative? So this one isn't really about interactions with students. These are boundaries that you set on yourself for sharing information about your students.
I don't understand the prompt.
So
Sorry.
during and or after tutoring, so you feel compelled to talk about it to something happened in that session, something's been going on with that student, whether it's they had a meltdown, whether it's they came in and were in a really distressed emotional state, they failed the test, they're talking about self-harm, or they're giving indicators of something's not right, and you feel compelled to go and talk about that. Who do you talk to and how do you set boundaries on who you talk to?
When you have the Qualtrics form, and you can say, does this person need to follow up with their LEP counselor? Click yes. And then type in there like what the concern is that you have. I guess I'm not positive how fast the LEP counselor will actually look at that. If you
Some do, some
yes.
don't.
So,
Preferably if it's an immediate need, you'll email me.
right.
Yeah.
So that would be my next step. If they didn't read that quickly enough.
Yeah.
Just also emailing.
But what if it's a late night session and you go home and your roommate's like, how was tutoring?
And my roommate says I was tutoring.
If you have a roommate, like if somebody asks you how it's going, how do you not just unload?
Say, it was great. How was your day?
Right? How do you avoid gossiping about your tutees to people who are not connected to the LEP?
I mean, are we bound by confidentiality anyway?
To an extent. To an extent. So some things, if a student is indicating self-harm, you're a mandatory reporter, you have to tell someone.
Well, yeah, of course.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, what goes on in a tutoring session either stays in the tutoring session or goes to the people who need to know. And I know it's hard when you go home to not just unload about some of the outrageous things that happen in tutoring sessions. Feel like you were say something.
Well, because something similar to this happened to me last year, and I think I made sure to contact everybody who I was supposed to and make sure that my student was actually okay. Because the thing is like my student unloaded on me a lot of things I felt like I shouldn't have heard.
Right.
And so then I talked to the person who was in your position last year and their LEP counselor, and both of them were like, oh yeah, we're well aware. And so then after that, like after I knew my student was okay, then obviously didn't mention any names or anything, but that was when I kind of talked to my roommate where I was like, that was really hard.
Yeah.
So I like waited until I knew the situation was fine before I even like.
Yeah, and this is a difficult one, right? Because this is where it starts to impact the tutor's mental health and emotional health. And how do you keep that in? Because we have people that we trust that we want to talk to, and sometimes we have to get something off our chest, right? And so what you want to do is you want to protect the student's identity and you want to protect their disability status. So usually just saying, I have this student that just, right, keep any details out of it. Hi, I'm in the middle of a recording session at 6:30. Okay. So we want to make sure that our students are taken care of, but we also want to make sure that we're taken care of. So we take that confidentiality piece and make sure that we're not sharing information that could identify that student per FERPA, right? No IDs, no names, no emails, no specifics about disabilities, no specifics about the incidents. And those are kind of the boundaries we have to set regarding working with our students. Sorry, she really threw me off.
The look on her face.
The look on her face. Good Lord. Anyway, any final thoughts on setting boundaries? That's pretty much all I have. Any questions, any final discussion?
I had two questions kind of related to the last scenario. Oh, well, the last one and then another one. Regarding the take-home test, do you have any sort of tips for like if it's a math class and like you ask them, you know, what homework problems do you have? I'm usually what I've been doing is I've been saying, what homework problems do you have? But like you said, and we can talk about this later if you want, but I'm just trying to make sure that, you know, they're actually giving me homework problems and not, you know, problems that they copy down off the midterm.
Well, that's hard, right? I mean,
yeah.
Take each one as an individual instance, I think.
Yeah.
It indicates that it's anything for a midterm, anything for a final, anything for a quiz. I think at that point you say, look, I can give you some like problems, but I can't work on that specific one.
Okay, that's kind of what happened.
On their specific problems anyway. You should be working on like problems and showing them the process.
Yeah.
Because if they understand process, they should be able to solve the problem.
Yeah, for sure.
Anything else for you?
Yeah, I had a question about the group project one. So, like, I feel I've worked with students who've done like their portion of the group project. Is that still like, I don't know how to ask, is that like still like okay to do?
Yeah, so
because I wasn't like working on anybody else's portion
right.
with them, like I was just working on their portion.
Interestingly enough, somebody brought this up in our meeting yesterday. And as long as you're working on the students' stuff and not their classmates' stuff, you should be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just have to work on their stuff.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts? I gotta get out of here. The lady's gonna go dragon lady on me.
Kim, you said enter this in the Qualtrics?
Yes. So
okay.
For time, please make sure, Zoomies, that you put your name down in the chat so I can record it. And then for the time, make sure you fill out a the Qualtrics under missed session or missed clock in, or you log in and out of Chronos and put your time in there. Okay?
That's good.
Are we good? All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, please. What is your? We're gonna take it into the break room. Yeah, just right here. I'll put the code in for you. Thanks, guys. We're good. Show. Are you still there?
I am still here.
I'll come see you. see you in a few minutes.
Lovely.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Take care, all.
So Kim, you said we're not supposed to help them. What's that? You said we're not supposed to help students with their actual assignments?
You're not supposed to help them solve specific problems.
So